I'd like to welcome you to the May 13th Town Hall meeting. Well, my name is Wesley Tucker. I'll be your host today, and Jill Scheit will be your co-host. I just wanted to take one real quick second to highlight the committee that is behind this. There are a lot of faces that make these weekly town halls successful, and sometimes you get to see some of us, sometimes others are in the background, and I just really wanted to give a big shout out to everybody on the committee that has made this program successful. So we have a lot of fantastic people behind the scenes making this work. We are always have the availability to ask questions. And so you can enter your questions at any point in time in the chat. You can go down there to the bottom of your screen and just enter them in. You can click on everyone to enter your question so that it goes to everyone that will see it on the meeting. Or if you would like to ask your questions anonymously, Jill Scheit, the co-host, has changed her name to Ask Questions Here. So you can click on that button and ask your question there. And so only Jill will see it. But we really, really want to encourage you to go in and submit your questions. That's what makes these town halls successful, is whenever we can make them interactive. So the agenda is we are going to start off with Dr. Pat Guinan with a weather report as usual, and then hopefully move to Dr. Paul Beck, managing Summer Annual Forages for livestock production. Unfortunately, Dr. Guinan had another meeting that he had to catch as well and is not going to be able to join us today, but he has pre-recorded his session for us. And so I'm sure you guys are going to enjoy that. So Jared, let's kick off Dr. Guinan's weather report.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'll get right into the weather report. We started off really chilly this morning. Look at some of these low temperatures across the state. When you get down this low in the mid 30s, there's likely, and there has been, reports of frost across parts of Missouri. I've seen some reports across northern Missouri, as well as in portions of the Ozarks, where they dip down to, you can see in Crawford County right here at the research center, which is located in a lowland area. They got down to 31 degrees. So cold temperatures running about 20 degrees below normal for this time of year. But fortunately, we're on the rebound. I don't think we're going to be seeing freezing temperatures anytime in the near future, with the pattern change and warmer weather on the way. We just really haven't seen warm conditions for the month of May so far. We started out the first couple of days warm, but it's been cold ever since then. On the left, not only Missouri, but much of the northern plains, the Midwest, have been running below normal for the first 13 days of the month. Here in Missouri, we're running anywhere from about 3 to 5 degrees below normal for the first half of May. Believe it or not, last year, we had a very cool first half of May. It was colder last year during the first 15 days than what we're seeing so far this year. But nonetheless, we know it's been cool here this year, but also last year we had some very cool conditions. On the right is precipitation departures. You can see here in Missouri, we're running near to even below normal for May. Southwest Missouri, southern parts of the state are the exception to that. They have been getting some decent rainfall for the month so far, and so they're actually running a little bit above normal. That graph you see on the bottom right shows some of the highest totals for the first 13 days. And you can see in Southwest Missouri, parts of the Boot Heel, anywhere from 4 to over 6 inches here in Vernon County, where they've had some notable precipitation. On the other hand, on the right side, bottom right, those are some of the low totals we've seen so far. Some areas have seen less than a ½ inch for the first 13 days of May. And that's in this area of East Central Missouri, around St. Louis County and surrounding counties, and then extending northwestward in the North Central and the Northwest Missouri, where they've been running below normal. It's interesting to note with these cool weather conditions we've had over the first half of May, evaporation losses have been really minimal, not that much. And so soils are still actually kind of moist because of the cool conditions. But I think this map here showing the below normal precip, that's going to be changing notably over the next 6 to 10 days. And that'll be shown in some of the rainfall forecast that I'll have in a few slides. But soil temperatures on the left for the past week, from May 6th to 12th, they've declined. They've gone down notably from the previous week because of the very cool conditions. They're generally running in the mid 50s, upper 50s across the state, some low 60s in parts of southern Missouri. To get an idea on how that compares to average, this blue line here in the middle of the map shows the average 21-year mean of 2-inch soil temperatures. This red line is what we've been experiencing over the past few weeks. You can see how that's taken that dip in early May and gone well below normal with these very cool air temperature conditions. Of course, that translates to cool soil temperature conditions. As of mid-morning this morning, you can see how temperatures at the 2-inch depth under bare soil were across the state, generally running in the low to mid 50s across most of Missouri, still well below normal. But those conditions are going to change over the next few days. Speaking of a pattern change, starting tomorrow in northwestern parts of the state, there is going to be the chances of showers moving into Missouri, and those are going to become more widespread as we go into Saturday, Sunday, and early next week. According to this map, they are indicating a stationary boundary to set up from west to east, from Colorado through Missouri and on into Ohio. That will be a meandering front. It'll move a little north, it'll move a little south, but it'll pretty much stick around somewhere in Missouri. That will be the catalyst for day-to-day chances of showers and thunderstorms impacting much of this area you see here in green. So multiple chances for rain, but of course, no day will be a complete washout. We will actually probably see most times of the day being dry, but there will always be occasional chances of showers and thunderstorms as long as this boundary hangs up. And so for several days, this could mean some interesting situation in regard to excessive rainfall, and we'll have to keep an eye on that. I talked about a gradual warming trend over the next few days, and so on the top part of this map, these are high temperatures over the next 4 days, starting today through Friday, Saturday, and on and through the weekend. You can see with high temperatures, I think today will be the peak day of the week. Just a beautiful day with these warmer conditions as we go into the afternoon, generally in the mid to upper 60s statewide. Full sunshine, light winds, just a really nice day to be outside. As we go into Friday, we start to see the impacts of those clouds and chances of showers impacting northern Missouri, northwestern Missouri. A little bit of a cooler condition because of those clouds with highs in the low 60s, but generally mid to upper 60s pretty much across the rest of the state. A gradual slow warming trend because of cloudy and chances of rain. Those maximum temperatures won't have an opportunity to get as high as they should be or could be. Typically this time of year, we see highs in the mid 70s. Looks like better, warmer weather conditions as that warm front perhaps moves across a little bit more of northern Missouri, puts us more into the warmer weather with highs getting back to near normal, generally in the low to mid 70s statewide on Sunday. That looks like a nice warm weather day. Forecast lows over the bottom maps here over the next 4 days. Tomorrow morning, another cool morning, but not as cool as this morning. Lows tomorrow morning, generally in the mid 40s. Of course, with those clouds coming in, that will keep the minimum temperatures elevated at night. And so you can see Saturday, Sunday, and Monday morning, generally lows in the mid 50s, upper 50s by Sunday morning, even dropping only down to around the lower 60s on Monday morning with those warmer conditions. This is what we need to keep an eye on. This is a forecast of precipitation over the next 7 days. You can see there is a lot of water forecast to fall across the middle part of the country, generally from Kansas to much of Missouri, through Oklahoma, Arkansas, down into Texas, anywhere from 2 to as much as 4 to 5 inches right here in southeast Oklahoma, northeast Texas. For Missouri, it looks like widespread heavy precipitation, generally 1.5 to as much as 3 to 4 inches in far southwestern Missouri. I will make a note that this is just a forecast, and so some of these numbers could actually be somewhat conservative on who gets the heaviest rain. And so with this type of forecast over so much real estate, this type of verification could lead to some flooding issues, obviously, and that includes main stem rivers like the Missouri and parts of the mid-Mississippi River. I would be more concerned right in this area with this heavier rainfall on the potential for some flooding of the rivers as we go into the middle part of next week. So something to keep an eye on. This is the forecast for next week. It covers the 6 to 10 day period from May 18th to the 22nd. So it gets us into the third week of May. It does look like these warmer conditions that we're forecasting later this weekend and on to early next week are going to persist with a generally good confidence, a high confidence of above normal temperatures. And so with that type of forecast, I would see highs perhaps by early next week and through much of next week, generally in the upper 70s, maybe perhaps some lower 80s, and more humid conditions because of the chances of precipitation continuing. Low temperatures generally would probably be in the 60s. On the right, this is a forecast of precip. The greens are enhanced likelihoods of above normal precipitation. So it does look like this wet weather pattern is going to continue. So warmer conditions and much wetter conditions as we go into the weekend and through much of next week. That's pretty much a weather wrap up. Thank you so much.
As always, Pat, we really appreciate the weather forecast and is always extremely very beneficial and helpful. Thank you so much. So with that, I'm going to turn to our main topic, which is managing summer annuals for livestock production. It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Paul Beck from Oklahoma State University. He's a state beef extension specialist there, and I've had the opportunity to work with Dr. Beck a couple of times through the years, and I've always found him extremely helpful and extremely applicable to what we as livestock producers are trying to do out here on the farm. So we are delighted to have him as our guest speaker today, and I'm going to turn it over to him and allow him to share his screen and take over.
Excellent. Thank you, Wesley. Really appreciate the invitation to speak to your group, and hopefully we can present some things that are of use to the producers in Missouri and across the Midwest. I have substantial experience in the Deep South in Arkansas, and I was originally from here in Oklahoma. So, you know, most of my experience managing these summer annuals are from that aspect, you know, deep Southeast type of production system in southern Arkansas and more of a high plains kind of dry weather type of production. In our area, we've had quite a bit of drought setting in, and I'm really glad to see that we got a chance of rain coming up for the next 5 days. That's going to be really helpful as our wheat starts, is starting to fill. A lot of our summer annuals are getting planted or have been planted. So it's going to be that's going to be a great help for our summer crops for sure. That's kind of one of the aspects of summer annuals is they're extremely water efficient, or at least a lot of these sorghums are. So they actually fit, in a production system, even whenever we are looking at drought. But as far as forages go, I like to couch it in, especially these annuals. Here's the Eastern Oklahoma pasture production calendar that my old forages instructor, Wilford McMurphy, had put together probably 40 years ago, maybe 50 years ago. But when we're talking about annuals, we're talking about filling gaps in the system of our permanent pastures. And, for, Eastern Oklahoma, where we do have a lot of tall fescue, we can expect, fall forage production in October and November. Whenever it starts cooling down, we get rain. And then it starts growing again in February and March. And this is probably going to be a little bit different for Missouri. But we also have the ability with tall fescue, Bermuda grass, and some of these other introduced forages to stockpile. And that's what I have here with the red bars extending that use of that, not really extending the growth of it, but stockpiled tall fescue kind of fills a gap for a lot of our production systems, through the winter. You know, a lot of times we use cool season annuals to fill gaps. That's what we do in Oklahoma, right? We are famous for pretty much just growing wheat pasture, and that's one of the, whenever I was growing up on the farm, that's really the only crop we had was wheat. So we got to utilize that for pasture and could harvest it for grain. But especially where we're dependent on cool season perennials, and if we don't have some Bermuda grass to go to, warm season annuals fill a gap that can be a considerable import. Whenever we look at tall fescue, the stocker cattle research I've done with tall fescue, you know, especially the toxic fescue, it's not a stocker quality forage. You know, it analyzes to be really good, but we're looking at, you know, extremely low average daily gains. You know, in the fall, we can get about a ½ pound reduction in gain compared to a non-toxic fescue. But in the spring, we're looking at about a pound reduction in performance with tall fescue or stocker cattle and tall fescue. You know, over about 15 years of research in Arkansas with toxic fescue, we had a fairly good range of average daily gain from about a 0.3 pound up to about 2¼ pounds per day on toxic fescue. Fairly good stocking rates, but most of those gains were down there toward that 1 pound per day during the fall. During the spring, you know, a fairly variable grazing season, but, you know, going from losing nearly a pound a day to gaining nearly 2 pounds a day, you know, with an average of around 0.75 pounds a day. You know, we're really not going to make a lot of money in the stocker business if we have gains that low, because we're not adding enough weight to bring our cost of production down. And, you know, when we're looking at trying to graze through the summer, offset some of those, you know, these warm season annuals do fit that niche, and they are high in quality. Historically, for the most part, we're looking at it as an emergency crop or for hay. There's a lot more interest in using it in cover crops or simple cover crops or complex blends. And, you know, whenever we're looking at these cover crop blends, we don't know a whole lot about the grazeability of a lot of those. A lot of them haven't been tested for grazing preference and a lot of that. So that's kind of an open book. But even though they're chosen for their agronomic benefits, they, you know, appear to yield very well and have pretty good forage quality. So the rule of thumb for grazing millets, Sudan grass, and sorghums is to start grazing at 18 to 36 inches, leave a stubble height of 6 to 8 inches. And that's fairly difficult when we're trying to manage grazing because it has just a rapid growth habit. You know, it will stop growing whenever it, you know, gets dry. And then if we get a rain, it can jump, you know, seems like 4 or 5 feet overnight. So trying to hit those targets, that's a good goal, but it's fairly hard to do in a grazing system. Here's you know, some iron and clay cowpea that we had put in some plots at the Southwest Research and Extension Center at Hope. These are clean till plots, but, you know, it took about 4 to 5 weeks before we got to a point where we felt like we could actually have those and use them for grazing. And cowpeas are a very common blend in those cover crops. Here's a sorghum. And when we're looking at sorghum, you know, right here on week 4, you know, that's about where we would want to turn those cattle in. And then on week 5, it's way too big. or getting, past that. And then, by the end, middle of the summer, it can be up 6 feet tall, and that's about where we would want to harvest that for hay, and we could possibly get a second hay cutting off from that for the later summer if we get a rain. But it can rapidly get away from you, and it really doesn't. Those mixtures, they don't come off at the same times, and that may be a good thing as far as spreading out the timing of when cattle would get the best use of it. This is a study I did. It's getting to be fairly dated. It's comparing a standard variety of sorghum hybrid to a brown midrib. The NutriPlus brown midrib is the triangle shapes, and then an experimental dry stock variety that's since been released. But historically, we think about with these brown midribs, which is a genetics that decreases lignin, decreases NDF, increases digestibility. There's a yield drag with those, and this kind of effectively shows that yield drag or a decrease in yield. The top line here on days after planting is substantially higher than the experimental variety, the dry stock variety. It's a brown midrib, and this other NutriPlus brown midrib. But when we look at this on equal maturity, as far as days past planting, the Sweet Sunny Sue, this standard variety, is much higher in maturity at most of our dates after about day 48 post planting. Looking at here at day 48, our NutriPlus, this brown midrib, is still in the 7 node stage, where our Sweet Sunny Sue, the normal variety, is all the way into the early boot or the flagleaf stage. And as we get later into maturity, and by the end of this season, we have day 63 here on into August, we're looking at hard dough grain stage for the standard variety, and the brown midrib was down here still at early heading. So when we compare this on the same maturity, our yield is actually better at equal maturity for that brown midrib than the non-brown midrib. And so, maybe when we're talking about a few days, there's a yield drag, but whenever we hit the target of, we're trying to harvest at early heading to boot stage or flagleaf stage for a hay crop, for sure, that's going to make a good bit of difference in that timing. Crude protein, because we're looking at decreased maturity on days after planting, as we get later and later in the season, we have an advantage in crude protein, and notice we're falling from about 34 days after planting, which would be about when we would consider grazing, almost in 13%, 12 or 13% crude protein, falling all the way down into the single digits in crude protein when we get into that later stage of maturity. Total digestible nutrients are much better for that brown midrib than the other varieties whenever we're looking at days past planting, and a lot of that has to do with maturity, but also it gets to be much more pronounced when we're getting into these very late stages of the summer. This is another study we had done looking at a Sudan grass hybrid. And, we realized this was done several years later, that when it's in the boot stage, we're making right at 10,000 pounds of forage dry matter. So, equivalent yields at that time. But then when we get later on into maturity, in this particular year, we had a lot of rust and fungal diseases come up on this older variety, and we had a huge increase in yield per acre with this brown midrib. And as we get more and more new varieties, they're not going to put that brown midrib technology into a bad variety. So usually, if it's a brown midrib, it's going to be a fairly high quality variety. And TDN at both growth stages was substantially better with that brown midrib than the normal. Crabgrass is another popular annual, and I threw this in. And a lot of times we look at it like something akin to a Bermuda grass, where it loses a lot of maturity as we get past harvest. Here's 21 days after a hay harvest, 35 days and 49 days. We have a really nice 3x increase in dry matter yield. Here's the growth stage. We're still looking at stem elongation versus late heading, but we don't have near as much fall off in quality as we would expect, especially compared to those other warm season annuals. Those Sudan grasses lose a lot of protein as they get later into the season and more mature. Fairly, big decrease in TDN, but still, that's not as substantial as what we would see with Bermuda grass with that 28-day increase in with interval. So crabgrass is a little bit different, and it's a lot easier to manage the grazing on that with stocker cattle for sure. So looking at this growth production calendar again, if we're using our warm season annuals as a cover crop, and in Oklahoma, there's a tendency to want to get it planted after wheat, have a cover crop through the summer, and then we want early wheat pasture. So we destroy that crop, in September for planting in early to mid-September, depending on our goals for that cool season annual. So we're leaving about half of the utility out on those warm season annuals whenever we start trying to get that wheat planted in early September for sure. So one of the things I looked at this last summer is planting our cover crop in early August. We had some rainfall in early August. This was no-tilled into a grazed out wheat field. This is a brown midrib pearl millet that was planted, and then 40 days after, so we're looking at a late summer cover crop that we're going to want to utilize during the fall while we're waiting for wheat pasture. This is when it's first coming up in early August after it was planted. And here's 40 days later. We had planted this cover crop. It was like I said, brown midrib pearl millet and a 7 species blend that included pearl millet, sorghum Sudan, okra, cowpeas, mung beans, several other legumes, along with okra. So we grazed this with some dairy Angus composite steers coming out of some dairies, actually coming out of the upper Midwest. They were the calf ranch was in Missouri, where we sourced these from. In these type of cattle, they have no previous experience grazing. So everything they experienced is novel. They never followed a cow to graze. So it's interesting to watch their grazing behavior and see them try to experiment and figure out what they liked. So their initial preference was for that pearl millet. But later, the broadleaf species were completely grazed out. And whenever they found those, realized that, they could graze those, their preference went directly, totally to the broadleaf species and even the okra. You wouldn't think anything would graze okra, but they fully utilized the okra and mung beans and cowpeas. And then their other second preference was for the sorghum Sudan grass. And then their last preference was for pearl millet. Even though it's a brown midrib, it was, fairly leafy. It was the last thing standing at the end of that. So my concluding comments is, they can be part of a year-round grazing system. It's got to fit your system. You've got to figure out where it's going to be the most use. It's really hard to pencil out a profit for these warm season annuals if you're just using it as a cover crop between June and August. Most of the time on grazing these cover crops, you might be able to break even as far as the gain you're getting from them. But it's really hard to utilize that and get the necessary benefit over just a couple of months. It's a really nice gap filler before cool season annuals are available. In our country here, we can usually start grazing our wheat pasture or other cool season annuals in early November to mid-November. And we can utilize, even if it, frosts, we could utilize these, after the prussic acid potential is gone too. So, we may have to pull off from them if we're worried about prussic acid, but, going back on while they're, when they're dead and desiccated, the cattle will still perform real well. It's a really good potential non-toxic break for weaning spring-born calves on or before calving and breeding in a fall calving system. Cool season annuals, can really help provide some, fall and winter grazing that's going to be non-toxic. So, those are some other, potential uses for these annuals as well. If we can utilize, a warm season annual to use to set the stage for cool season annuals. And with that, I really appreciate the invitation and would try to answer any questions you have at this time.
Really appreciate the presentation, Dr. Beck. I know that very first slide, it struck me when you showed the fescue there on the top line and showed the gaps in there. And then you look down and see the cool season annuals, how closely they fit to the summer slump that we experience in Missouri. So definitely very, very applicable. Jill, do we have some questions? I know I saw at least one question come through the chat.
Yes, we have a couple. The first question I think is referring kind of early on into your presentation, and it says, what was the row spacing for the Sweet Sunny Sue versus the BMR test?
That was, in that study, we used a no-till drill to plant those. So we were on a 7-inch spacing.
Okay, thank you. Another question. Can any of these summer annuals be drilled directly into a fescue stand?
We had done some of that in Arkansas when I was there. The answer is if you can go with a wide spacing, more on the maybe a 20-inch spacing. We did not have as much damage to our permanent grass stands as if we used a real close spacing, because Bermuda grass, I know the question was tall fescue, but with Bermuda grass, the only good way to kill it is through shading it out. And whenever we're trying to kill a tall fescue stand and replace it with a non-toxic tall fescue stand, I know there's been a lot of this with Craig and some of the others in Missouri, but it's a spray, smother, spray, and that middle smother part is planting an annual crop to shade out the fescue seedlings. So we can shade out and thin a stand, even if we don't spray it. We can thin a stand through shading it. And if we're trying to keep a stand of tall fescue and use that for multiple uses, then I think we'd have better luck with a wider seeding, more row spacing of the annuals. And you can on wider spacing of these annuals, you can still get really good production. Cattle will go completely off from the tall fescue and just graze those warm season annuals because they're so palatable and they're not toxic. So we had got some really good luck doing that. But anytime you try to use the same land area for two different things, whether it's double cropping, interseeding cool season annuals into Bermuda grass, or interseeding warm season annuals into tall fescue, you're going to decrease the yield of both of those systems. There's the potential for shading out some of your tall fescue and doing that.
Thank you. And then one last question I see here. I kind of heard you refer to toxicity in fescue. So what about, these summer annuals? We're always 7 days away from a drought in Missouri. What should we look out for there as far as toxicity goes?
So one of the reasons why I wanted to try that pearl millet is because of prussic acid concerns. And one of the issues we have in this area where we're growing these with our intermittent summer droughts, or even season-long summer droughts in Oklahoma. Whenever growth is stopped and then it starts regrowing, the early growth, whether it's due to frost or a drought, the early growth on that regrowth can be toxic with prussic acid. The other issue with that during a drought in the summer, especially, is if we fertilize very heavily, we can have issues with nitrates, and both of those will kill cattle pretty rapidly. So those are also some concerns. We have rules of thumb. The great thing about grazing these, especially the warm season annual grasses, is they're going to graze the leaf and stay away from the stem as much as possible. So our nitrates are going to be higher concentrations in the lower stem. There's not as much worry about that. And most of our concern with prussic acid is later in the season when we have light frost that's not a killing frost. So that's really the two main concerns that come along with these warm season annuals.
Jill, do we have any other questions?
Not at the moment.
Well, Dr. Beck, I really want to say thank you once again for your presentation. As always, great, and we really appreciate it. Very useful to our producers here in Missouri. Thank you once again. And there's his contact information. If anyone has any further questions, feel free to reach out to Dr. Beck. Just once again, want to remind everyone that the recordings of these sessions are out there on YouTube, so you can go back and find weeks that you might have missed, or things even from today that you heard that you want to go back and re-listen to and just follow up on just a little bit more. Thanks for coming today. Want to highlight the schedule going forward. So next week, I think we have another great topic in store. There's a lot of conversation going on right now about the livestock industry and how, the high beef prices, but yet cattle prices aren't all that much higher or even higher at all than normal. So how does that equate? Well, one of the things we have to do is we have to increase packing capacity. And there's a company trying to do that right here in Missouri. So next week, we're going to have Stacy Davies, which is one of the owners of Missouri Prime Beef Packers at Pleasant Hope, Missouri. He's going to be on to talk about their project there and what they're trying to do and how they're trying to impact our beef industry here in Missouri. So I hope everyone will plan to join us next week. Thank you again for coming today and look forward to seeing everyone next time.